Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. So, what a day. I woke up to the news that I'm sure most of you have heard. God save the Queen, the fascist regime. Quoting the Sex Pistols song, which is titled God Save the Queen, which was actually recorded in 1977. Some of you might not be aware of who that group is, but that's quite an iconic band in the UK of England. So last night before I went to sleep, I had this very strong intuitive sense of a number of things actually sort of coming together just from a reflective process of what's been going on really the last sort of 2.5, 3 years. And I actually did write something on Facebook, I think it was, and it was just relative to the massive spiritual clearing and transitions that are taking place on Earth, inwardly, externally, in all directions of time. And then when I woke up, I received a message and it said, "The devil is dead." And so I knew what that was in reference to, and I wasn't really that surprised, but clearly it shows wherever you sit with the royal family, whether you like them, love them, hate them, it doesn't really matter. What does matter, however, is that this is a very poignant window in the collective evolution and processes of transformation and evolution, right? And this is an extraordinary thing that's happened. It's not a small thing. So I had a quick look naturally, as you know, we tend to do. We look at the astrology because that's how we learn, right? So by the way, today I'm talking about the full moon in Pisces, and I'll get to that in a minute. There's so much to talk about, and I just was kind of trying to figure out where to begin and whether I should talk about everything today, because I want to talk about, Venus shifting into Virgo. Mercury's just gone retrograde. It's going to have this opposition to Jupiter, for a few months. Mars is going to go retrograde. It's going to square Venus. Venus is going to descend into the underworld. She's going to prepare to be reborn as the Libran ingress star that we've got coming up. Anyway, there's so much to talk about. I just really didn't know where to begin. In any case, let me just say that this is a rectified time for the Queen Elizabeth II. The time given is a different time to this one. This is a rectified time. Now, this time makes sense for a number of different reasons, and the most obvious, of course, is that transiting Pluto is on her ascendant and has been there this year, which is a powerful signature and symbolism relative to a transcendence, a transformation, a death, rebirth, etc. Because the soul of Elizabeth has transcended. Her body has died, but the soul lives on, right? So the first house with Pluto on the ascendant can certainly signify that. Now, there's a few things that have been kicked off relative to her chart, and there would be a number of different things, and I know everyone's going to rush in to talk about it, and I might come back and do a separate thing, but I just want to flag immediately just the most obvious things to me through my eyes. So Pluto on the ascendant, let me just grab a little assistant here to highlight things. So there's the new ascendant, which is 27 Virgo, transiting Pluto, is on that ascendant. We could say that transiting Pluto is also conjunct the South Node. It's only 7 degrees away. Okay, so there's that. Now, the Venus star point that we had in Capricorn earlier this year is conjunct her South Node. Transiting Saturn is conjunct her Mars. It's also conjunct her Jupiter. I think she's 96, turned 96 this year, so she went into her first perfected house, which is ruled by Saturn, because Saturn rules Capricorn, and Saturn's doing big things to her chart relative to Saturn on Pluto, on Mars and Jupiter. What else was there? The Libran star point that occurs 22nd of October this year, which is just weeks away, right? Now, the star points can activate 3 months prior to the exactness of date, okay? So that Libran star point sits up here relative to the quadrant house system. If you go to whole sign houses, things shift quite dramatically in this particular chart, and that's because of the location of birth, which is high north, right? So a lot of things shift, like the MC goes into the 12th house, and that's a very unusual thing to see, for instance. In any case, if we're just looking at this chart, the Venus Libran star point, which is at 29 degrees, well, it actually forms an opposition to her Mercury. That's kind of close enough. Now, Mercury does rule her 8th house in this system. The other thing, though, that's really interesting is that the Venus star point is opposite her natal Eris, the goddess Eris. And Eris is still quite a new body in our consciousness and psychology and understanding of astrology, so we're still learning a lot about her. But in any case, it is fair to say that she is a body that speaks to the necessary evolutionary shifts and transformations. And so, you know, Venus Libran star point opposite her Eris. And finally, the other thing that I saw that I thought was extremely interesting is that there's a solar eclipse coming up just days after the Venus star point. Venus star point, 22nd of October, solar eclipse in Scorpio on the 25th of October, and that's at 2 degrees of Scorpio, and so that forms an opposition to her sun. So, I mean, these are outstanding, very clear and direct hits that could all speak to the event that's taken place. So I just wanted to share that little bit of information because I know there'll be lots and lots of things coming up from lots of people over the next days and weeks and months and whatnot. And that's what I wanted to flag immediately, right? Especially because of the Venus star points, you know, activating South Node, the Libran Venus star point activating Eris, Mercury. In fact, it would be at the midpoint, somewhere at the midpoint of Mercury and Eris anyway. So yeah, fascinating stuff, right? I think we all kind of sense that things have been turning and shifting fairly quickly, fairly cataclysmically, you know, the last 2.5 years. And this is a pretty big omen for this event to take place because there's so much history there with the monarchy and just everything that they are connected to physically and spiritually, and that, you know, the control of banks and monies and whatnot. So we are definitely in the most revolutionary times of our life, at least in this lifetime. And so yeah, fascinating stuff. So let's go to, here's my full moon chart. So Mercury went retrograde today. This chart is for tomorrow, being Saturday in Australia. So this is the full moon chart. We can see that, let me just grab some little guys again. Where are we? So there's Mercury stationary at 8 degrees, so about to go retrograde. There's the full moon at 17 degrees of Pisces. Obviously we can see it's conjunct Juno, the goddess Juno, and it is also conjunct Neptune. Now, the first thing is obviously, and of course we have Mars in Gemini here and Venus in Virgo. Now Mars is going to go retrograde later in October. Venus is going to descend into the underworld. So, you know, just Venus alone in Virgo taking us through the experience of the underworld. And I wrote something yesterday, which perhaps I will just quickly read. It won't take me long. It's just about Venus in Virgo. Just very quickly, let me find it. So here we go. So Venus in Virgo, the priestess. She's the archetype of the priestess. And Virgo is an earth sign. It's a feminine yin sign, which is, it takes us inwardly. The feminine yin signs always take us in, right? And then I wrote, to purify or to improve oneself. This is the journey that Venus in Virgo takes us through. Her status of fall, because in traditional astrology, in the concept of essential dignities and debilities, that is a planet maybe in dignity or debility or in a neutral position. And I think that's a very valuable system to maintain in our astrology, and not have necessarily a dead fixed attitude about it, but certainly acknowledging and understanding what that means and how that might impact, a person's life, for instance. However, another way to understand Venus being in fall in Virgo, being this earth sign, it's the spirit descending into the physical. It's like the fall of the spirit, into the physical, right? And that has biblical references. It has traditional, it has a lot of different references historically, spiritually, philosophically, and so forth. And so, even just that alone gives us a little bit of encouragement, because there's an intention here from the soul to descend into the physical in order to evolve, which emerges from the one source creation to all things. Consciousness is what we are, and the one point of consciousness has made the decision to experience itself, which is us, through the physicality of this life, and hence the spirit descending into the physical. And so Venus in Virgo holds that kind of a vibration from an esoteric perspective. So in Virgo, I wrote, she opens the portal of self-examination, because Virgo is a sign, the archetype that speaks to self-examination in a number of different ways, right? And that self-examination takes us through a journey of a purifying process. And that purifying process is can be integrated, understood, and experienced through love, because it's Venus, and Venus is the goddess of love. So it's a purifying process of self-examination, but through the heart of love, we could say, right? That's how I see Venus in Virgo for us over the next few weeks. She won't be in Virgo too long. She went in there on the 5th of September, and she'll leave Virgo on the 29th of September. If I have time, I might come back and share a few more comments, but in sort of in the crux of it, just the few comments that I made could be valuable to reflect on for yourself relative to where Venus is transiting in your chart, for instance. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And also, I just want to quote directly an astrologer by the name of Mark Jones. He's English, actually, and he's a psychotherapist, and he's also an evolutionary astrologer, and he's fantastic. I think he's just incredible. Anyway, he's been a little bit active on Facebook of late, and I just noticed he wrote something about the Virgo Pisces polarity. And this is really important because we've got the sun in Virgo. We had a new moon in Virgo, which was square Mars at 4 degrees, which is a critical degree. 4 degrees of mutables is a critical degree. So that new moon began in a pretty, you could say in a bit of a hostile way, because it was square Mars. Mars is hostility. So it's not an easy lunation cycle that we stepped into from a couple of weeks ago. And so the emphasis has been the Virgo archetype through the new moon, the lunation cycle. And of course, the sun's journey through Virgo, continuing that process, you know, for another, couple of weeks. And 2 weeks later, as in from the new moon was 2 weeks ago, so 2 weeks later, now we have the full moon in Pisces. So here's the Pisces Virgo axis being completely illuminated, right? Which is what a full moon does. It illuminates, for better or for worse. There's no right or wrong, good or bad. It just illuminates what's there, whatever that is, right? So first of all, where was the new moon in your chart? That is the activation point of that cycle, this cycle, and what that will show for you now during the full moon, right? Because the full moon is the result of where the new moon began, okay? So it's going to be in polarized houses. So it started in Virgo, now you go to the opposite side. Where's Pisces for you? That's where the full moon is. And now this is where you see the fruits and rewards or illuminations or greater sense of understanding and insight into what you could not see previously, right? So I really love this statement that Mark Jones made. He says, the Virgo Pisces polarity, an inwardly directed orientation to analyze the motivations and results of previous actions, ultimately produce a cleansing of the personal self, which is recognized as perfectly flawed, and inevitably surrendered to a greater and more complete spiritual realization as the ground of all being. I think that's such a rich way to describe the Virgo Pisces polarity, and it is something that you can just meditate on. Actually, there's so much you can extract from this these couple of sentences. So I just wanted to share that. And I suppose relative to that, when we think about this full moon in Pisces, I personally feel, even though these are very obvious attributes that I'm going to point to, they're not just intellectual concepts in my mind. They are that, but they are something that I can feel and intuit and resonate with very strongly from an interior position, right? Namely a spiritual one. As I said, the new moon in Virgo didn't start off in a particularly easy way, particularly because it was square Mars, okay? And there's an inherent conflict in play already, being sort of pointing towards that, right? So on the one hand, the new moon in Virgo, could have been speaking to, and I have spoken about it, so I don't want to repeat, but we just kind of need to put some context here as we step towards that full moon. We started the lunation cycle with this portal opening, a lunation cycle of our consciousness looking at and examining the areas of our life where we can improve further on ourselves, right? Remember, Virgo is ego denial. In terms of the wheel, the zodiac, the 12 signs, and the development of the ego, which is the personality, begins at Aries and completes at Pisces, okay? And so when we get to Virgo, which is the next sign after Leo, the process of the ego development or personality, when we get to Virgo, reaches the point of ego denial. And in Maslow's hierarchy pyramid, in the world of psychology, it points to that process of it becomes an inverted thing. So where we were developing and having a strong sense of self and an understanding of who we are, what our identity is, who we are as a person, who we are becoming. When we get to Virgo, it's kind of like the checklist comes up, and it's like, okay, so you've been building this personality, this sense of identity, which is born at Aries and goes through quite a significant process relative to Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and Leo. And so just very quickly, Aries is the birth, you're born. Taurus takes us into that field of, learning to understand our own sense of self, our physicality, our sense of self-worth, things like that. Gemini is where we learn language. You can think of this as the the chronological sort of development of a child, that an infant that's born, right? So Gemini is the first air sign, which is where we learn how to speak, right? Language. Cancer, the first water sign, is when we first step into that field of our own emotional container, understanding that we have these emotions. And Leo is where we get that ultimate sense of our own identity in its full bloom, shining completely. I know who I am now. That's why Leos have such a strong presence, such a strong personality, such a strong ego personality. It is the sign or the archetype of the complete personality, as it were. But then when we get to Virgo, there's this sense of actually I'm not as great as I thought I was. I have got flaws, I have got cracks, I have got things that I can work on. And so now let me have a look at that from an introspective level, and let me have a look at my kind of checklist, right? If you want to talk about a list of things to do, that's Virgo. That's the archetype of Virgo. So Virgo helps us go into sometimes what appears as crisis as well. Virgo is an archetype that corresponds to crisis. It's an internal crisis because it's the recognition that there's more work to do. I'm not perfect. I am flawed. And how can I do this? What do I need to do? It's the recognition of those sorts of insights, right? Which requires a lot of honesty. Just confronting that component of yourself. So we could say that this is in the mix of this lunation cycle, right? Relative to where we are at in our life at the moment and things that are going on in our own personal, professional life. And so we come to the full moon, and Pisces is one of the most mystical signs. It really is. And that's basically popular astrology even, right? It's often said that Pisces is so mystical and it's an enigma, and so Scorpio for that matter. But yes, Pisces is truly a mystical sign. It holds a container for everything. 12th house Pisces, Neptune holds everything that we see and don't see. Now, the full moon in Pisces is can be a very cathartic full moon because it can really assist us in emotional cleansing and purification, right? It's a very sensitive, deeply sensitive full moon because it is right there with Neptune, which is its ruler. And so there's spirit is right there. Neptune, spirit is right there with his full moon. And it's actually saying to us, to each of us, we have to surrender. We have to trust. Now, a lot of people identify the term surrender as the experience of giving up or feeling defeated, deflated. It's not that at all. Surrender is something that requires us to step out of the components of who we think we are from that ego personality level. It is the ego and the personality that will never surrender, but the spirit and the soul is always seeking to surrender back to its source creation to all things, spirit, divinity. So whatever's been going on in your life the last couple of weeks, let's say if this lunation cycle has been activating things in your chart, then the full moon just simply asks us to step into the experience of surrender and letting go, literally letting go. Now, the tricky part about this is that it tests your faith, right, to the maximum. And for some people, that can be a really critical situation, real crisis time, right, where there's a really significant thing going on in your life, which is not just it's not going to come just out of this lunation cycle. There would have to be a number of different things activating your chart, right? If it's a big cataclysmic crisis type of event. If it's not, and it's something milder, then you would look at this full moon as a beautiful opportunity for spiritual, emotional cleansing and purification, very simply put. If there's something quite significant and cataclysmic that has perhaps taken place or been activated during this lunation cycle, then the test will be, how much do you trust the source of you, the source creation to all things? Because, you know, when we're going through life and everything is smooth, apparently smooth, and there's no call or asking for anything, you know, to sort of put you in a position, not that anything or anyone puts you in any position, but feeling like you're in a position where your faith is being really challenged because you are facing such a severe, critical situation in life, right? And so your faith is really tested, right? And this is where you are being asked to show how much you really actually trust. True surrender, true trust into spirit. And that spirit has got your back, just to use an expression. That spirit is directing the evolutionary path that you are on right now. So that it can be a really strong testing period where you know, that there could be a sense of just feeling so decentered, as it were, because whatever has happened has really rocked your foundation. You know, it's rocked your faith, your belief in that the universe is conspiring for you to manifest and continuously evolve to your greater self, your higher self, which it always is, right? And so this full moon can illuminate these sorts of themes for all of us in different ways. For some people, it might be very extreme. For others, not so obvious, right? And the thing that I'm reminded of when I think about this full moon in Pisces, I think about Pluto in the 12th house, okay? Because Pluto in the 12th house is actually, according to evolutionary astrology, and I can actually say that because I have lived that this is absolutely a true statement. So it's not just something I've read, it's something that I have lived, and I know many of you out there have too. Pluto in the 12th house is the most difficult placement, whether it's natally or whether it's by transit. It is going to test your faith, your trust, your ability to surrender to the absolute hilt. It will test every single thing you try to put into place, to activate, every single structure, every single decision. It's the most complex, intense, I don't even know what words to use to describe it. So this full moon has a flavor like that, right? Because it's in Pisces. And Pisces, well, with Pluto in the 12th house, one of the things that can be a reliving type of theme whilst you've got Pluto in the 12th house is that because you are trying to create a certain reality with certain decisions you make, certain pathways you take, Pluto it seems to have this ability to disintegrate things, right? Things just kind of dissolve. They don't manifest into that particular pathway that you thought they were, right? Because the soul is going through an evolutionary process that it's being asked to surrender. And that surrendering process involves a metaphor that is used is that you are standing, the soul, you, is standing on a cliff. And there's no safety net, okay? It can't see what's in front of it because it's looking into the abyss. Pisces, 12th house, Neptune, the unconscious, all directions of time, spirit world. It's looking into those spheres, as it were, but it can't see anything. It can't see what's there. There's no safety net. Your safety net is Saturn, which is a false sense of safety net because that can crumble at any time. And it's being asked, take that dive. Take that dive, take that leap of faith, surrender and trust. It's like going bungee jumping without the rope attached to your legs. Is it your legs? Yeah, it's your legs, that your ankles where they attach the rope, right? And someone says to you, just dive, don't worry about it. There's an invisible rope there. You'll be fine. Would anybody take that leap? No, probably not. It's a little bit like that. I know that sounds really extreme, but that's how it is with Pluto in the 12th house, and with a full moon in Pisces, it certainly won't be to that extent. I'm just using a really intense example to demonstrate just how much this Neptune, particularly because Neptune is here with this full moon, the asking of us to trust and surrender. And it'll bring you to your knees, so to speak, right? And you can't see a solution ahead before you if you're in a real crisis, cataclysmic type of situation. And you're right at the, you've got nothing left to grasp on from that external sort of level, right? You're trying to find something to hook into to help you feel that safety net, but there's nothing there. And then the final kind of passage comes in and says, okay, are you ready to take that dive? Are you ready to trust, even though you cannot see what's before you? And the outcome will be based on whether you took that leap of faith or whether you just caved in, I suppose, right? It's a very challenging asking. It's a very challenging position to be in from our human physical personality level, right? Because we don't operate like that in this third dimension reality. We are mostly aware and consumed by the physical experiences, which also connect to our mental jargon, our mental processes and so forth. So this is a really powerful full moon from those levels that I spoke about. And again, we have Venus in Virgo as well. So there's a process of going within, self-examination, self-analysis. That's what Virgo is about. It's deep self-analysis. And Virgo is always going to find a fault. It's always going to criticize. It's always going to find what's wrong in me, in life, in the world, in why isn't the world supporting me? Why isn't this working for me? It's always, that's when it starts to get into a bit of a loophole that it just feels powerless or defeated in certain ways, right? So we should try to let the Venus in Virgo take us through that beautiful inner feminine underworld journey of tapping into the priestess within, whether you're a man or woman, doesn't matter, or anywhere in between, doesn't matter. It's that beautiful feminine, earthy goddess, priestess purifying energy that can help us discard what needs to be discarded, discriminate. That's what Virgo does. It discriminates. Now, the word discrimination is often used in a very negative context. In the world of law, people pursue people in court for discrimination and so forth. And I'm not talking about it from that lens. Discrimination in the context of the Virgo archetype is really about being able to stand in a centered place where you can discriminate. That is, see, recognize, identify, be extremely clear about, perceptive, discern the old ways, old habits, old ideas, things that are no longer serving your evolutionary path moving forward, right? And cleansing and purifying and taking care of, nurturing that inner dimension of our being. So Venus is the goddess of love, so we must do it in a loving way. Now, Venus in Virgo can go towards that incredibly critical, negative sort of Virgo at its worst kind of level, where it's critical and negative about everything. That's not useful to anybody, not to yourself, not to anybody else. It's one thing to have discernment, to have a critical mind, and to have the ability to discriminate relative to what's necessary for you and what isn't. That's a different thing to falling into that space where you feel it's a little bit dark and it's a little bit deflating, and there's not a lot of sense of self-empowerment in there because everything's just viewed through a very negative lens, and there's no opposite side. There's nothing there that you could see a sense of hope or direction towards. It becomes this self kind of loathing, kind of guilt. Guilt is another good word for actually both Virgo Pisces as well. And there is a difference between man-made guilt and a natural sense of guilt. That's a whole other story, but the guilt complex is very powerful in the access of Virgo Pisces. And we must also discern what's man-made guilt and what's guilt, I suppose, from a level of truth that aids you towards evolution, as opposed to making you feel like shit, making you feel bad, that doesn't foster or nurture any particular growth or development so that you can make confident or productive decisions to work through a situation or to alter your path or whatever it may be, right? So these are the themes that are very strong with this full moon in Pisces. Of course, we must also consider that with Pisces Neptune, there can be disappointment that comes along relative to a particular ideal that we may have had, that we were projecting onto a situation, and now the Pisces Neptune energy brings in that disappointment because it didn't transpire or manifest in the way we had hoped or thought. So again, it's that there comes in Spirit asking you to trust. It has cultivated an outcome. It has directed an outcome. It has taken you in a different direction for a greater purpose that your conscious mind cannot identify right now. Again, I keep coming back to that bungee jumping example. It's like if you've got no rope on you and someone tells you to take a dive off that cliff, it's going to be very difficult to trust that there's an invisible rope there and you'll be okay. It's it's not an easy thing, right? So now just a couple of other things. Mercury, which is stationary retrograde, forming this opposition to Jupiter, and the opposition to Jupiter will be in play for quite some time, I think a few months, because they're both retrograde, right? Well, Mercury will be retrograde by tomorrow, so they'll both be retrograde, and they will be in a proximity that creates the opposition, right? So let me just see, I've made just a couple of notes. Yeah. So this is a very interesting thing because Mercury is in Venus's sign, Mars is in Mercury's sign. They're just a couple of things that are really interesting because of Mercury going retrograde, because Venus is taking us through this alchemical purification of honesty within ourselves relative to eliminating, think about Virgo in the physical body, and I've mentioned this a few times. It's that those intestines, that part of the body that discriminates all the toxins out of the body, maintains the nutrients, discards the toxins. And so we can take that's a literal physical thing that happens in our body, which corresponds to the archetype of Virgo. And so that can be taken in a number of different levels in our life, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, right? We are always working through things, right? Checking the list, seeing whether we've got this done, that done, this right, this isn't working anymore, let me try this. Okay, that didn't work, okay, let me try that. Let me inquire a little bit more into that. Why does this work over this? And how does it work? This is Virgo territory. So Virgo can offer us a lot of gifts in that way, right? Just relative to getting some things right in our life for ourselves, for our own growth, for our health, for our evolution. Going back to Jupiter, Mercury, they are the two planets corresponding to left and right brain. Mercury is left linear, Jupiter is right brain intuitive, and they are opposite each other. So they are transmitting energy with one another, to each other. And where is the transmitting happening? It's happening in our own consciousness, in our own mind, left, right brain. And it is an opposition, which oppositions generally are experienced as a polarized sort of energy or force or experience, but ultimately they speak to this greater sense of illumination, awareness. Awareness is the best word for oppositions. So this opposition speaks to having a greater sense of awareness. Mercury, our own thought processes. In Libra, being able to see both sides to situations, being able to hear and listen to other people. Mercury going retrograde in Libra, a Venus-ruled sign. Venus is the goddess of the gift and artistry of listening. It's not Mercury. Mercury is the anatomy of the ear, which enables us to hear, but Venus corresponds to listening, the art of listening. It is an art form. So Mercury is in Venus's sign, Libra, assisting us in that process of learning to listen and hear and understand and observe objectively both levels of the information, data, communications we're having, ideas that we have ourselves, things we're learning about, things we are understanding more from in our own mind, things that we've been weighing up. Libra is always about weighing up, trying to establish that harmony and that balance. Libra is marvelous with its ability to be objective and actually see very clearly both sides to any situation. It can get caught up in the sometimes it can get caught up in the experience of it doesn't know which way to go. It can see both sides very clearly, and it's sort of caught in the middle of, well, should I take that side or should I take this side? Should I do this or should I do that? So it has this problem of seesaw, that seesaw kind of experience sometimes, right? In any case, the opposition to Jupiter, because Jupiter is in Aries, which is pointing to the beginning of a beautiful new journey, because when Jupiter entered Aries, which is the beginning of the zodiac, it started a whole brand new cycle for all of us, right? It's at the first sign of the entire zodiac, and it's starting a whole new, fresh 12-year cycle for all of us, right? And in Aries, it's about our own sense of trusting our own intuition, Jupiter, having faith in ourself, Aries, self. And whatever we've sort of connected to externally before, objectified or projected, in order to feed back to us faith, safety, belief, Jupiter. In Aries, it's an opportunity, while Jupiter is in Aries, for us to gain a greater sense of strength within ourselves relative to the faith we have in ourselves. You know, seeing that we are resilient, seeing that we are spirit, immutable consciousness, which can never be destroyed, basically. The physical, ends for everybody at some point, but spirit doesn't. And so Jupiter in Aries injects that confidence and sense of courage into oneself from the point of view of having that deep, deep, deep faith from a deep inside level that is not codependent or dependent on anything external of us, right? So this process with Mercury and Jupiter being opposite each other is going to bring up these sorts of matters. What are we thinking about? What have we been believing? In Libra, seeing, being objective, being clear about what we've been thinking, seeing, identifying, believing, Jupiter. And in Aries, again, as I said, injecting that sense of confidence in our own ability to have faith in ourselves, no matter what transpires in the world, no matter what comes into your field of experience, trusting source from that deep space within yourself. And the opposition from Jupiter to Mercury is going to throw up these sorts of processes and journeys relative to our left brain and relative to our intuition. And in Libra here, there is a sense of being able to harmonize perhaps those spheres of left, right brain and bring them in a closer alignment, a unified alignment, a more balanced position within ourselves relative to left brain, right brain. So it's a pretty powerful opposition, actually, pretty amazing. And also, Jupiter is such a magnificent force, such a giant energy, giant planet, and it corresponds to the expansion of all things. No boundaries, no limits. Limits and boundaries is Saturn. Anything beyond that, the expansion into infinity, let's say, would be Jupiter. It takes us into those fields where we can dream and reach so far into our intuitive perceptions, connections, understandings, insights that ultimately are underpinned by the faith that you have in yourself, Jupiter in Aries. So the mind will be, it's an interesting dichotomy actually, because Mercury retrograde takes us on an inward journey, a reflective mental process, weighing things up in terms of certain choices, pathways, decisions, and reflecting on all of that and ultimately deciding which way we're going to go. But Jupiter being opposite Mercury, it's going to add a charge to that Mercury, to our mind. Our mind is probably going to be incredibly buzzing, just fully charged, fully energized. Or sorry, I can't hear that. I can. Very loud truck. Just what was I saying there? Just trying to make a point of how don't be surprised if your mind is really buzzing and really charged up, over the next few weeks while Mercury is retrograde. It still has the retrograde component to it, because it's going to be retrograde. So it is an introspective, reflective process of making decisions on things, seeing both sides, and working out which is the best way forward for you, for instance. And I think it's important to really acknowledge Jupiter's presence there, because it corresponds to intuition, right brain. It's pointing to our own mental faculty and processes and things that we're weighing up and thinking about, and drawing from Jupiter's intuition. Jupiter, right brain, intuition, draw from that. It's right there with Mercury, right there with it. And it's in Aries, so rely on yourself. Rely on what your own instincts and intuition tell you. Jupiter in Aries, very powerful opposite this Mercury. Okay, so I will still come back to talk about Mars going retrograde, because that kind of needs time and space for itself. I might try and do Venus in Virgo as well a little bit more, although I feel I've given quite a few significant points to consider with Venus taking us through that purification process where we can really work on ourselves through love, through the heart of Venus, and not fall into the trap of seeing everything from a real negative lens, which can be Virgo a lot of the time. And finally, and I will leave it here. And finally, full moon in Pisces. It's very sensitive, very emotional. Can bring in some disappointments for some people, but fundamentally, the asking and the calling is from Spirit to you, to all of us, to trust, no matter what is appearing, to trust, to surrender in perhaps what might feel like the most impossible situation, to trust. That's the ultimate message through the full moon in Pisces. Spirit's direct message to you to trust that it's okay. That it's okay. Okay, so I think that's really all I wanted to say. And yeah, once again, interesting times, hey, with the Queen. The Queen. God save the Queen. Very, very interesting. Okay, I'd love to hear from all you guys and see how you're going, hear how you're going. As always, questions, comments below, always welcome. If you're new to my channel and you enjoy this, feel free to subscribe to my channel, share, etc. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions that I might be able to help you with. And I shall see you guys very, very soon. We're also coming up to, it's the 9th of September. Oh, that's the 21st. I might come back and talk about that. Equinox shift, I'm thinking. Yeah. God, there's so much going on. And that solar eclipse, by the way, that's occurring 25th of October. Well, we are within range of that already as well. So if you have angles of your chart, and you need a right time of birth for that, accurate time of birth, or if you have planets at the early degrees of Scorpio, Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, well, this eclipse is activating those points, all those bodies in your chart already. And it is a solar eclipse, and solar eclipses are very powerful, and they do tend to speak to physical, external manifestations of events that come up. I mean, look at look at the Queen. That solar eclipse is right opposite her sun. It's only less than 2 degrees, or about 2 degrees away from her sun in opposition. That's pretty strong. And as I said, Venus star point, South Node, Libran, ingress of new Venus star point, which I'll be sitting with Ariel to talk about that actually when she has some time. She's very busy at the moment. Opposite Eris. Anyway, I went through this before, but I just, yeah. And the perfected year is first year for her, the Ascendant ruled by Saturn, and Saturn's very important in her chart. Even with this rectified time, Saturn's conjunct the MC, or the 12th house. Saturn on Mars, Mars is your life force, and Saturn is the stifling, denying of that life force, just to put it very simply. So anyway, it's all there. It's all very obvious. And see you guys very soon. Thanks for watching, and much love. And hopefully it's a cathartic and purifying, cleansing full moon for you, even if it brings loads of tears, even if it already has. Tears are good. Tears are good. They can be felt as quite an exhausting process for the physical body, but they are incredibly purifying, such a powerful release. So, if you're feeling a bit more sensitive and a bit more emotional at this time, that's cool. It's okay. Go with it. Trust, surrender. Higher self, spirit. That's what this is all about. See you soon.